Guardian. All links, as always, will be listed below. Media gagged over bid to report MP child sex cases. Warnings not to publish intelligence that might damage national security. When they sought to report on allegations of a powerful group of men engaging in child sex abuse in the 1984, one executive said that it had been accosted in his office by 15 uniformed and 2 non-uniformed police over a dossier on Westminster pedophiles passed to him by the former Labour cabinet minister Barbara Castle. The others said that his newspaper had received a D notice when a reporter sought to write about a police investigation into Elm Guesthouse in southwest London, where a group of high-profile pedophiles was said to have operated and may have killed a child. Now it has emerged that these claims are impossible to verify or discount because the D notice archives for that period are not complete. Officials running the D notice system, which worked closely with MI5 and MI6 in the Ministry of Defense, said that files going back 20 years are not complete because the files reviewed in correspondence of the routine nature with no historical significance destroyed. Basically, the files were destroyed because it was deemed not important, significant information by those who caused the cover-up. Calls for full inquiry as allegations of the 1980s abuse by a powerful pedophile network in London resurface. Thank God. The former Elm House near Barnes, southwest London, where boys in care were allegedly groomed for sex. The handsome Edwardian house that was formerly Elm Guest House near Barnes in southwest London was long ago converted into flats. Its 8 guest rooms were rearranged into 2-bedroom apartments, each worth today more than £500,000. Estate agents say that among the property's greatest attractions are its transport links. Some 30 years ago, the convenient location was similarly appealing. It is just over Hammersmith Bridge, as well as served by underground and bus services by the British Rail and near the M4, A3, A4, and A40. These had ideal access for privacy, maintaining privacy for this particular building. 2 months later, Elm Guest House were raided by police and its owners, Haroon Carol Kaser, were convicted at the Old Bailey of running a brothel. The Kasers had allowed a small industry to bloom in their establishment. Male prostitutes had found it inconvenient to place a convenient place to take clients, and it was probably perceived as a safe retreat for gay men in a society which, despite the legalization of homosexual acts in 1967, which is illegal in God's eyes, was still profoundly homophobic. After Carol Kaser's suicide in 1990, it was perhaps how some would have liked the story of Elm's Guest House to have ended. Today, however, this suburban house is in the heart of the simmering scandal, threatens to boil over and take with it the reputations of a swath of political class of the 70s and 80s. Cyril Smith, the late Liberal MP accused since the death of 2010 of being inveterate child abuser, is said to have regularly visited the property. Other names of some household figures swirl around the internet. Back in 1983, Geoffrey Dickens, a Tory MP had got wind of something like this. He compiled a dossier telling his family it was explosive. It would blow the lid off of on powerful and famous child abusers. The dossier was handed over to the then Home Secretary, Leon Britton, who acknowledged the receipt in a letter suggesting that the police be informed. In general terms, the view of the Director of Public Prosecutions is that 2 of the letters were forwarded. You could form a basis for inquiries by the police, and they are now being passed to the appropriate authorities. Pressed last week, the Prime Minister ordered another look. Thank God. I've asked the Permanent Secretary of the Home Office to do everything he can to find answers to all of these questions and make sure that we can reassure people about these events. Yet the Observer reveals today the Dickens dossier was just one of 114 potentially relevant files found to be missing by officials when they did their initial search. The public are going to think something is fishy going on, and who could blame them, said Simon Denzuk, the Labour MP who outed Smith as a child abuser. At least there is some justice finally coming to a head, even though it's 30 years later. These are some very important questions that need to be asked. What did Leon Britton do with the dossier of allegations compiled by Tory MP Geoffrey Dickens? Why did the police not investigate the claims contained within the Dickens dossier? Did the Home Office fund the pedophile information exchange, and if so, which minister approved it and why? What happened to the 114 documents relating to the organized child abuse in the Home Office admits it was either destroyed or lost? Question number 5. Was the late Cyril Smith MP part of a network of high-ranking politicians and officials working in the 70s and 80s to cover up the child abuse? This is huge, and thank God that people are actually not letting this issue go despite the time that has gone by. Police are reportedly reviewing whether there is evidence of this alleged sexual abuse committed by the late Liberal Cyril Smith was covered up by individuals at Rochdale Council. An investigation is already underway into the allegations that Smith raped boys at Rochdale Knoll View Residential School, which closed in 1992, and abused boys at the privately run Cambridge House Children's Care Home, which closed in 1965. Smith was originally a Labour councillor at Rochdale and later a Liberal and a Liberal Democrat MP for the town of 1972 to 1992. The party, absolutely, as the Labour Party must also, and indeed Rochdale Civic Society in a whole, need to answer serious questions as to who knew what and when, said Farron. In a statement earlier this month, the Liberal Democrats denounced Smith as repugnant after a book by the most recent incumbent as MP in Smith's Rochdale seat, Labour Simon Denzuk, detailed repeated crimes by the politician and drew similarities with serial sex offenders Jimmy Savile. In regards to the 114 documents that were missing, here's another article. Again, the article will be linked down below, which provides further links to all these articles. These are listed in their entirety, but if you would like to do your own research, which I highly recommend, that good people not allow evil to take place, because when good people stand by and allow evil to grow, evil grows. A dossier compiled by an MP detailing the allegations of the 1980s Westminster pedophile ring. More than 100 potentially relevant Home Office files were destroyed, missing, lost, or missing. It was emerged. The government faced fresh calls for an overarching inquiry into the historical cases of pedophilia, as it was revealed that a total of 114 Home Office files relevant to allegations of child abuse network have disappeared from government records. The reevaluation that further relevant documents have disappeared will raise fresh fears of an establishment cover-up. And here is an article link by a father whose son was killed, and the boy's father has been pressing for 30 years now that his son's file not be closed. The father of a murdered child who believes he may have died at the hands of a pedophile ring involved high-profile individuals said that the Metropolitan Police was still failing his family 33 years on from the killing of his 8-year-old son. I can't pronounce that name. Vishambar Mehrotra told The Guardian that if the police had covered up the links between his son's abduction and a killing in 1981, that the activities of the pedophiles at the guest house in southwest London that is now at the center of the new police inquiry into the murders of children, they should be working even harder to bring the killers to justice today. I agree 100%. Malhotra's son, Shiva, went missing in July 1981 in Putney, less than a mile from the Elm House Guest House in Rock Lane, Barnes, while on his way home with his family from watching the wedding of Prince of Wales and Diana Spencer. He had been walking slightly ahead of the family with the crowded streets where revelers were celebrating. 7 months later, the upper half of his torso was found buried in the woodland in West Sussex. After 30 years, the police are still failing to find the person responsible for my son's death, he said. I have come to the conclusion that maybe for whatever reason they have not really done their homework. If high-profile people were involved, this must be exposed. If there was a cover-up, I need to know. There was information passed to me that I gave to the police at the time, but it was never looked at, and the trail went cold. I taped the whole conversation and gave a copy to the police, and they just dismissed it, saying that it was probably a crank phone call. If the police have any sympathy for us as a family, for what we have been through and are still going through, they should be in touch with me now and tell me that this has come to light. They need to be looking at my son's case in connection with this. I have not heard from them on this. I have not heard from them for years and years. A detective contacted me 10 years or so after my son's death to say that he was going to look at it again, to reinvestigate, then nothing. All went quiet.
This is a father claiming that Scotland Yard covered up a son's murder, reportedly involving a Conservative MP. This goes back some years, and this is a father, a retired magistrate, in an interview with that particular newspaper, the Daily Telegraph. How do you respond to that? As you say, this story takes on a fresh impetus each day.
I mean, each day, this is just the most... you can't think of a more serious and grotesque allegation than that. Clearly needs to be looked into. I think it's right, for instance, in other parts of the country that police officers are now under scrutiny and under the magnifying glass for not having acted in Rotherham, for instance. There's this real sense, as you've heard from the Ofsted report, the local authorities have not been alert to all of this. So it's no wonder that someone like Ian, who suffered abuse himself, feels that they have been ignored for far too long. We had the problem that the chair of the panel did not enjoy the confidence of people like Mr McFadden, and Theresa May has quite rightly said that we're not going to make that mistake again.
This is the Grey City, Aberdeen in Scotland. Home to over 200,000. It is a centre for tourism, culture and history. But if you scratch beneath the surface of this granite city, you'll find a dark underbelly of corruption, scandal, abuse of power and of children. Meet Anne and Holly Gregg. Now, Anne had an abusive husband, and it was in the year 2000, whilst battered and bruised, she was pursuing a divorce. It was at this time when Holly first divulged that her father had been sexually abusing her. Now, although Holly has Down syndrome and therefore suffers learning difficulties, she has a photographic memory. Whilst she struggles with abstract thought, her memory for detail is impeccable. Now, at the age of 32, Holly has managed to give evidence that exposes a paedophile ring in Aberdeen, which includes her father, politicians, judges, and most importantly, for the events that happened in the summer of 2000, police officers. Now, little was Anne to know that when she first went to report the abuse of Holly, she would be reporting the crime to the very criminals themselves. And in hindsight, it's no surprise at all that 10 days later, a group of 12 medical and police officers turned up at Anne's house, forcibly injected her with a sedative, and hauled her off to a mental institution where she was falsely diagnosed with schizophrenia. Holly was then returned to her father. Thankfully, Anne managed to get an independent diagnosis, and she was given the all clear. She then spent the following years gathering evidence for a prosecution of Holly's abusers. Now, part of that evidence was Holly's medical record, and whilst analysing the medical record, she discovered that at the age of 10, Holly had been diagnosed with a sexually transmitted disease while she was at school. She was seeing the school doctor. Now, the school doctor reported this to the headmaster, but the information never got back to Anne. And again, in hindsight, it's no surprise, seeing as the headmaster was also one of the abusers. Now, Anne also wanted to get justice for herself. She'd been unlawfully sectioned, and she wanted to find out who ordered it. And when she tried to get hold of the documents which recorded her sectioning, she realised that they had been destroyed. According to the records, she had never been sectioned, and therefore history had been altered. So let me introduce Robert Green. Now, Robert has been acting on behalf of Anne and Holly. He's been trying to convince the police to interview Holly, interview the alleged abusers, and he even tried to run as an MP for Aberdeen South with a party called Scotland Against Crooked Lawyers. So Robert's very, very good at pursuing evidence and uncovering corruption, and he's been instrumental in securing a lot of hard evidence that may be needed in a future criminal prosecution. Now, after exhausting all the avenues that could be taken to persuade the so-called authorities to uphold their oath of office and pursue this crime, Robert was left with no other avenue than to blow the whistle on who these individuals were, these very high-profile individuals. And on his way to present this information, he was leapt upon by two undercover police. He was then held without charge and without contact to the outside world for 4 days. So he was basically abducted, and in the meantime, his home was raided, and all of his evidence, all of his documentation was taken and evaporated into thin air. He was then charged with breach of the peace and released on bail. His bail conditions were that he must not talk about these individuals, and he was actually banned from the whole area of Aberdeenshire, which meant, for a first in political history in this country, somebody actually campaigning to be MP of an area was not allowed into that area to campaign. Now, I'm just sticking to the framework of this case. Of course, there's a lot more gritty detail, including the murder of Anne Gregg's brother. For all of the details, there are the campaign websites, and I'll give those at the end. But sadly, Robert is now spending 1 year in prison. Presumably, while he's there, they'll be trying to convince him that 2 + 2 = 5. Now, if you've not heard about this case before, I'm not surprised. That's because there has been a gagging order, a super injunction upon the media. All of the Scottish media and various media in England, including the BBC, are not allowed to talk or even mention this case. The leader of Scotland, Alex Salmond, has remained silent and even denied knowledge of this case. And our own Prime Minister David Cameron has refused to discuss it. So I went along to the Royal Courts of Justice to attend the most recent case. And when I arrived, I bumped into one of the chief campaigners, Belinda Mackenzie, and I asked her what on earth was going on.
Right, well this is an issue which is being discussed in the appeal court, and it's to do with whether Holly has capacity to decide for herself who she wants to represent her and what sort of decisions are made for her life. And this right, fundamental human right and legal right, was taken away from her last summer by the family court judge, who declared from her bench that Holly does not have capacity, despite there being no medical evidence whatsoever in front of her that she doesn't have capacity.
But you have evidence that says that she was previously...
She does have capacity. This is in police reports, expert interviews over the years say that she has capacity. The criminal injuries investigation authorities report also stated she had capacity and was telling the truth. And there is so much evidence from everybody who's met her that she's perfectly lucid, intelligent young woman with a slight speech impairment, that's all.
Could you just update us on the status of Robert Green? We know his background. We know he's currently serving a prison term.
Well, he's in Aberdeen prison, HMP Aberdeen, Craiginches. He was taken there on the 17th of February after the judge declared the sentence of a conviction on grounds of breach of the peace and breach of bail conditions.
What peace was he breaching?
He was upsetting people in Aberdeen. Now, one of my placards reads, "Whose peace has Robert Green breached?" Which is the big question, because most people want to protect children.
So we all went in to the Royal Courts of Injustice, and the trial was a few hours long. I'm not an expert in these things, so to be honest, all I really saw was a massive pile of paperwork and 3 guys sitting behind a desk wearing Star Trek uniforms. That's literally what it was like. Although I did get the impression that the judges were not taking it seriously. But luckily, as I left, I managed to bump into Brian Garish, the man who started the UK Column newspaper, and I asked him to clarify.
So Brian, tell us what happened in there today.
Well, it's very simple. That basically there was an appeal lodged, and that appeal was to have the previous court decision overturned, where the judge had ruled that Holly was not competent. And basically the appeal judges threw out the appeal, so the appeal was not upheld, and that means that the whole of the case has now been thrown back into the secret family courts, where the state has now made a judgment with no medical evidence, no facts, nothing to back it up, that Holly is not competent. What does that mean? Of course, that means that her original testimony of her rape and abuse at the hands of a number of individuals is now absolutely thrown into doubt. And as a result of this hearing, in my opinion, circumstances have moved a long way to the state taking Holly, putting her in some form of care, inverted commas, where many people believe we will never ever hear her proper testimony again. So the state here made a decision that judges can arbitrarily deem that somebody is not competent. They do not need to be medically qualified themselves. They do not need to have medical expertise available. They can simply make a decision. This is Soviet Britain. It is unbelievably dangerous, and it is incredibly dangerous for anybody who has a Down syndrome child, because of course this case is focused around the fact that Holly is a Down syndrome girl.
And tell us, this sets a precedent for other cases that may happen in the future.
This case is enormously important because the judges, with no jury present, of course, have just ruled that a single judge can make a decision as to whether somebody is mentally, intellectually competent or not. They don't need a psychiatrist present, they don't need a clinical psychologist. Judges can simply make their own decision as to whether someone is mentally competent. This is, I think the right word is scary, because this is absolute Soviet system, and it's happening in the Royal Courts of Justice here. The other thing is that the public present, of course there wasn't enough seating room, so people had to sit on the floor at the back of the court. The judges retired for about 7 minutes, and then miraculously returned with a 40-minute judgment, and the conclusion of everybody in the public gallery was that the decision was preordained, had been cooked up before the case, and therefore, the outcome was already decided. That was not justice, in my personal opinion, and I believe many of the people in the gallery will agree. It was a rigged trial, and the further proof for us is that everybody's been, as usual with lawful rebellion, everybody's been friendly and peaceful. When we came out of the court, suddenly there are security men everywhere, and they want to throw us out the court. When we said to one of the security men, "When were you told to come here?" he said, "A little while ago." And it's obvious that the security men were sent because they knew then what the outcome of the case was going to be.
I think a lot of us know the case for treason thing, where
Yes.
I think the judgment was that the situation is so all-encompassing, so bad and so complicated that nothing can be done about it. Do you think there's a parity between these two?
Well, there's two issues. Is that once people have started to understand what has been done with the law, and I understand a little bit on this, and I'm not claiming to be an expert, but we know enough now to say that what is going on in the country is that common law has been buried under statute law, and what we are now seeing is an absolute dictatorship being brought in on the basis of the statute law. The statute, unless it agrees with common law or reinforces it, it's a useful tool to help common law, but if statute law contradicts common law, it is unlawful. So when we see this travesty in here, the mere fact there was no jury, this is not a court, this is some form of place of business. The judges know it, and the other people in that court know it, and this is not common law. If it was common law, there would be a jury making a decision.
For example, the Supreme Court
Yeah.
has nothing to do with common law at all, does it?
Absolutely. The Supreme Court, which has been drifted in as though it was something to help law in this country, is actually taking us further into the dictatorship, because it mimics not only European corpus juris, but in fact it's taking us to the Nazi system, where judges are just out of control. And I specifically mention the Nazi system because the fact that the judges are now wearing red...
What I call Star Trek uniforms, that's what they were wearing today, wasn't it?
If you do your research, you will find that the judges in Nazi Germany were wearing these red flashes. This is no accident. Yeah. No accident. Can we do something about it? That's what you said to me.
Was he or not the man wearing red today? There were just for the viewers here. There were two wearing yellow stripes. There was one wearing red stripe. Yes.
Correct. Yes.
The one with the red stripe was playing the devil today.
I think
was that my imagination?
No,
or?
I don't think so. It was clear that the man on the right of the bench, and you'll notice that I can only say the man on the right of the bench because these three men did not identify themselves to the court. They didn't introduce themselves to the court. They didn't have name badges. They didn't have name plates on the bench. So these, as far as I'm concerned at the moment, are anonymous people. But the gentleman on the right, many of the people in the public gallery thought that he was absolutely an actor in a very crude play. And what we witnessed was a letter magically produced from somewhere, which was then used to beat Anne and Holly's case down. And when it was actually shown to Anne to Anne is obviously the mother, she said, "I have never seen this letter." And there was a sort of scoffing from the bench, an unbelievable arrogance. At one stage, about 3/4 of the way through the hearing, we watched the clerk of the court smirking and laughing and joking with one of the other lady ushers. Absolutely appalling.
Yeah. So this is a crime that's happened today?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, what you have witnessed is a crime, because that is a trial, it's a puppet event.
You've been very generous with your time. If I may just end by saying, where do we go from here?
Right, the key thing, if we go to the good side, because a lot of people today are saying this is terrible. It is terrible. The good news at the moment is that people are waking up to what's happening. We are saying as the UK column, but if you talk to other speakers on the circuit, we are getting more and more whistleblowers from the police, and the quality of their information is excellent. We're getting people in hospitals talking, people in children's services talking, and I believe that we are now at the point where the truth is starting to break through the surface. All we need is more people. We need millions, not hundreds of thousands. How do you get them? Talk to people about what you know. We need 1 million people to do a few small things rather than 1,000 people doing a lot. And the solution is simply exposure. Once we have exposed Cameron and Miliband and Clegg and the rest of the people in Parliament, who in my view are clearly criminal in their activities, once we've exposed them, the game is over. The corruption is run on the back of the fraud in the international banks. Can we do something about the monetary system? Yes. Go and look at the Lawful Bank and look at the British Constitution Group. But anybody else who's fighting, whether it's Ian Crane, whoever it is out there, go and look at their material as well.
And stay away from Wikipedia.
Well, Wikipedia can be useful, but I've just had a joke with you a little bit earlier on today. If you want a big joke, go and see what Wikipedia says about me.
Okay, Brian, thank you very much.
Okay.
So, Brian Gerrish there. Do keep an eye on this case. I'll put the websites at the end of this broadcast. But in the meantime, do subscribe to S. Williamism, that's this YouTube channel. But until next time, I've been Samuel William, and this has been a production for Truth You Can Wake Up To.
This is our land. A land of peace and of plenty. A land of harmony and hope. This is our land.